Yeah, I'm going to talk about evolution by natural selection. And I don't know, how many of you are actually students, have studied biology at the BSc level? Quite a few of you. And how many of you have not studied biology? Okay, you've all studied biology. Okay, so I think, I hope it won't be boring for you. Because I've prepared for a general audience. I'm going to start by giving you a quiz. And it's just a very quick thing, 6 questions. If you have a small sheet of paper that you can give to me, a piece of paper, you can tear out the paper and I'll collect it right now, your answers to these 6 questions. So all you have to do is write down on the paper true or false for each question. Okay? So the first question is evolution is a struggle for existence. We must compete to survive. True or false? You can just write number 1, T or F. Okay? Number 2, Darwin discovered evolution. True or false? You don't discuss with each other, just write down whatever you think. Then number 3, humans evolved from apes in a march to perfection. True or false? And number 4, evolution is a very slow process, taking millions of years. And thus, we have never observed evolution occurring within the past 200 years. True or false? Number 5, birds evolved wings so that they can fly. True or false? And number 6, mutations occur in order for organisms to adapt to their environment. True or false? Okay, I've got lots of answers here. I'm just quickly looking through just to get a general idea. It looks like there's a lot of variation. I see people rating both true and false to many questions. So that means that maybe there's some difference of opinion between these different questions. But I see that there's quite a bit of difference from what I would... Okay, so yeah, unfortunately I find that according to what I think, people have different opinions on some of these questions, but according to what I think, all of these questions actually should be answered false. So there's a lot of you that have written true for a number of these. So if you keep listening, maybe you'll understand why I think that the answer should be false. And we'll come back to this at the end of the talk. Okay, next slide. Actually, what I'm going to do now is to go through a book that I've written, which is called How Do They Evolve? And this book, if you want to see it, it's actually available on in bookshops or on my website. My website address is here. It's just khaydock.com. Next slide. I'll just go along with the story. Many years ago, before your parents were born, and before your parents' parents were born, and before their parents' parents' parents were born, there were different food plants than there are now. Next. In those days, there was a kind of wild mustard plant. Now, I know that you are all scientists, or interested in becoming scientists at least. So scientists, what do? They ask questions. You can't just tell someone something and you'll believe it if you're a scientist. You have to question why. How do we know this? Well, We know this but because we find wild mustard, which is called the Brassicaceae family, at present. And we can extract the DNA from these different types of mustard and analyze it. And by analyzing the DNA, we can estimate when they first evolved from related species to see how long they have been around on Earth. That gives us one idea that long ago there were different kinds of plants than there are today, and the wild mustard evolved at certain ages. And we also find archaeological evidence of mustards in ancient sites. So people dig up places where they find ruins of where people used to live, and they find maybe some mustard seeds, and they can analyze those seeds to see what they are. Next. So our ancestors took seeds from this mustard and planted them in fields. Next. They took good care and they got a good crop. Next. In what ways, here's a picture of the crop. In what ways are the plants different and in what ways are they similar? So if you'll notice any crop of plants, you'll find both similarities and differences. In any population of plants as well as any population of animals or any other kinds of organisms. There will always be both similarity and differences. So it's pretty obvious if you look at these, what are the differences in the leaf shape and size, the seeds, the flowers, etc. Next. We can ask, why are they different? Is it because of the water, the sun, the soil? Or is it the seeds? Now this also, we can actually do experiments to find out how they're different using controlled variables. So for example, if we plant lots of seeds in a shady place and another lot of seeds in a sunny place and compare the results, then we can see, with everything else being equal, what is the difference between shade and sun. Next. But yeah, we will find out that some of the differences will be due to the seeds. And so what our ancestors did was, maybe they liked certain varieties of the plants better than other varieties. Maybe they liked to eat the young mustard plants that had closely packed leaves. So here they are picking those types of mustard plants, which would be they like those more than the other types. Next. They were very tasty. Next. The farmers needed to collect seeds to grow the next year's crop. So, next. These were the tasty ones. Next. So, they let the plants go to seed, except for the ones they had eaten, of course. And next. They went to seed, the flowers and seeds came out. Next. And these, the ones circled in red, those are the ones that they took the seeds from to plant for the next crop of seeds. The other ones they just fed to the goats. Next. And these seeds they planted the next year. Next. Now look, this crop has more plants with tightly packed leaves. So they kept doing this. Each year they selected seeds from the plants with tightly packed leaves. Next. After many years, what did they get? Cabbage. Next. Band gobi. Now in another place, suppose people like to eat the tightly packed, undeveloped flowers of some mustard plants. You see these? They like to eat those little white, undeveloped flowers. Next. A few of the undeveloped flowers went on to produce flowers and seeds. So these seeds were used for the next crop. Next. The seeds sprouted and the new crop grew. At the end of the season, the farmers again collected seeds from the plants with the best undeveloped flowers. Next. After many years of sowing the seeds from the plants with the tastiest undeveloped flowers, look what they got. What is it? Phool gobi. In yet another place, people found another kind of wild mustard that had thick, juicy roots. So they planted the seeds from these plants. Next. After many years, look what evolved. Next. Muli, or radish. That's not all. By doing similar things, they've developed all different kinds of plants, all from different types of wild mustard. These are all from the Brassicaceae family. Next. Now, again, we can ask, how do we know this? How do we know that all these plants are related to each other from the same family? Well, again, these are plants that are living at present. We can take their DNA, analyze the DNA sequences, and compare the genes that we find. And we find that the DNA is very similar, with a few key mutations. On the right-hand side, there's actually a fairly recent paper from 2021 where people have compared the DNA from cauliflower and cabbage, and they found that it's very similar except for certain mutations in places which are called structural variants, SVs. And when they can see exactly why these plants come out to be different, even though most of their DNA is the same. These are all Brassicaceae. Next. So many kinds of food crops were produced by people selecting the kinds of plants they wanted. And this is called artificial selection, where artificial simply means produced by people. Next. Now, suppose there were no people. What do you think? Could a similar thing happen without people? What do you think? Next. Suppose in a place without farmers, there's a population of wild mustard. As in any population, there's variation. Now suppose this field often floods, and in the floods, the plants that have very long roots will stay, but those with shorter roots will be removed in the flood. Next. So only these long root plants remain. What might happen after many years if there's often floods in this field? There might be more mustard plants with larger roots. So it's a kind of similar thing to what we saw with people selecting, but here the only selection is that the flood is occurring. Again, every population has variation, so there will be some plants with smaller or larger roots. Yeah, next. Or suppose there's another field of wild mustard. Next. In this field, some insects come to live. There's some little black beetles. And suppose these insects like to eat the large mustard roots, but they do not eat the small mustard roots. Then what might happen? Next. The plants with the large mustard roots died, leaving only the plants with small mustard roots. So after many years of having these insects eat the large roots, the population may evolve to have a population that has mostly smaller roots. Now, here the result may not be desirable for the beetles. The insects may have to move on to some other field because they don't find the large roots to eat anymore. Next. This process is called natural selection, where natural just means, next, not produced by people. So in artificial selection, the farmers choose the kinds of plants they want. But in natural selection, Nobody chooses what they want. There's no plan, there's no design. Next. So what we say is that evolution by natural selection is not teleological. Now, teleology, how many of you have heard of this word, teleology? It's a new word, no? Teleology just means that it's something that is done on purpose, by design. It's something that happens because of the purpose that it will serve. So, next. So in this case, it was not on purpose. In fact, did the mustard want to get large roots? Did the mustard evolve because it wanted or tried to get smaller roots? Or did it want to have large roots? Do plants have desires? What do you think? Does a plant want to have large roots and that's why it has large roots? It doesn't really make sense. Plants don't even have brains. How could they have desires? Or what did the insects want? Did the insects want to have plants with smaller roots? No, they actually would have preferred to have plants with larger roots because that's what they like to eat. But there's a question, do insects even have desires? And do they somehow manage to change the plants or the population of plants so that the plants come out the way they like? Another thing to remember here is that what's happening in natural selection is not that an individual plant is changing from having large roots to having small roots. It's the whole population that's changing. So when we talk about evolution, we're not talking about individual organisms changing. We're talking about populations of organisms changing. Next. So why does a population evolve? It's actually a rather confusing thing, and we're often confused between three different things: correlation, cause, and purpose. Okay, the purpose is the teleological reason. The cause is what actually happens. The plants change because of the beetles eating the large roots. Correlation just means that there is a correlation between the existence of the beetles in the population and the evolution of the population with small roots. We don't really know if the beetles are just correlated or if they're actually causing until we look closer and see that yes, the beetles are eating the plants with large roots, and that's why the small root plants are thriving. Next. So this is a summary of a good definition of what actually is evolution by natural selection. What happens is that, first of all, variation exists within all populations of organisms. And remember that a population is just a group of organisms of the same species living in the same place at the same time. Okay, so it's very important to remember that single organisms do not evolve, populations evolve. So variations exist within all populations, and no two individuals are identical. You can see this for yourself by looking at different populations of plants or animals. If you look closely enough, you will always see differences as well as similarities. And why are there differences and as well as similarities? The differences occur partly because random mutations occur in the genome. Genome just means the DNA. And these random mutations are there in the DNA of individual organisms. And these mutations can be passed on to their offspring. If they can't be passed on to their offspring, then evolution couldn't occur. So throughout the individual's lives, their genomes, the DNA, interacts with their environments to cause variations in traits, the way the organisms look and act. Throughout their lives, the genomes interact with their environments to cause these variations. And what do we mean by their environment? Well, their environment is everything, really. It's the molecular biology in the cell. Each cell interacts with other cells. It's that each individual organism interacts with other organisms, and each population of organism interacts with other populations of organisms. And it's also that each species interacts with other species. For example, the beetles were interacting with the plants, two different species. And also the abiotic environment interacts with the organisms. Abiotic simply means the non-living, the things like sunshine, soil, water, the climate. Now what happens is that individuals with certain variants of the trait may survive and reproduce more than individuals with other variants. And therefore, the population evolves. Another way of saying this is that the gene pool of the population changes. The gene pool is simply the collection of all the DNA of all the organisms. So the DNA has changed over time, and we say the population has evolved. Now, if the population changes enough, it may be called a new species. Next. Now let's come back to this true and false test to see why we had so much confusion here. Next. Let's just look at each question one by one. The first question was, evolution is a struggle for existence. We must compete to survive. Well, this is a very common, what I think is a misconception. A lot of people read this in their textbooks. And even Darwin himself, he used the term struggle for existence. But here's a quote from Charles Darwin in his book, which he wrote in 1859, where he introduced the idea of evolution by natural selection to people. And let me read what he wrote. He said, I should premise that I use the term struggle for existence in a large and metaphorical sense, including dependence of one being on another, and including, which is more important, not only the life of the individual, but success in leaving progeny. In other words, in reproducing to produce the next generation. He says, two canine animals, such as, say, dogs or wolves or foxes, in a time of dearth, may truly be said to struggle with each other. Which shall get food and live. But does a plant fight with another plant? Does a plant struggle with another plant? Do two plants living together in a place with less water have a fight, and one plant will try to prevent the other plant from getting water? How would that happen? Darwin says a plant on the edge of a desert is said to struggle for life against the drought. Not against the other plants, but against the drought, the lack of water. Though more properly, it should be said to simply be dependent upon the moisture. So those plants that happen to get more water will survive, and those plants that happen not to get enough water will die. But it's not really strictly a struggle for existence. So wait, go back. So evolution is really not due to competition between individuals. In our way of thinking about things, we kind of make a kind of a generalization that plants are like animals. We kind of anthropomorphize to think that um, other organisms are kind of like people and think like people, and these days, we're living in such a competitive society that we think individuals fight against each other, just like people fight against each other. But actually, even people don't just fight against each other. There's not just competition, there's also cooperation. So actually, individuals as well as populations are interdependent on each other. They're both competitive as well as cooperative. And they're also interdependent on their environment. Next. Let's look at the second question now. Darwin discovered evolution. Well, this also is kind of commonly thought that Darwin was the one who discovered evolution, but actually, here's a quote from a recent talk by someone named William Friedman. He says, Charles Darwin is commonly cited as the person who discovered evolution. But the historical record shows that roughly 70 different individuals published work on the topic of evolution between 1748 and 1859, the year Darwin published On the Origin of Species. These early thinkers, now almost entirely forgotten, included biologists, geologists, horticulturists, physicians, clergymen, atheists, philosophers, teachers, and poets. So Darwin did not actually discover evolution. Evolution was thought of long ago. Maybe even very, very ancient people thought they saw a similarity between different organisms. And they thought, well, maybe long time. They also saw that children don't always come out exactly the same as their parents. And so they thought maybe over long time periods, different individuals, different populations rather, have evolved into different types of species. But what Darwin did do, and also somebody else named Wallace did do, is that they discovered the mechanism, or one of the most important mechanisms of evolution, which is the evolution by natural selection, which is what we've been talking about. So now let's come to the third question. Humans evolved from apes in a march to perfection. And you often see this picture of an ape starting out walking into a larger and larger ape that looks more and more human until finally a human appears, which is the end result after many thousands or millions of years, and that the human is the sign of perfection. Humans are the best or the most perfect or the highest ranking individuals or the highest ranking species of all the species on Earth. This is the way we commonly think. But actually, if we look at species in detail, again by analyzing their characteristics as well as their DNA, we find that there are various species called hominids, of which humans are just one species. Humans are actually in the same group with gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. And these are actually all different species of apes, okay? Along with gibbons. Gibbons are another kind of ape. So it's really not correct to say that humans evolved from apes, because humans are apes. Humans are one type of ape. And apes are hominoids, of which humans are just one type. Next. And besides that, how can we say that humans are perfect, are an ideal species? If you just read the news reports, for example, just yesterday I read the news that another 26 people, including women and children, were killed by Israelis in Gaza. And we can see in the news how the whole all the villages, towns, and cities of Gaza have been destroyed. Now, is this a sign of perfection? Is this what we can call the highest form of life on earth? Doing such horrible things to each other? Next. The next question. Evolution is a very slow process, taking millions of years. And thus, we have never observed evolution occurring within the past 200 years. Well, for this, we can just think back to the corona pandemic. We kept hearing in the news about how new kinds of the virus kept evolving. And it was just a matter of weeks or months in which the virus would change into a new type of virus. And we could see this by analyzing the DNA sequences, which are shown here. There's 3 different variants of the virus, and you can see the DNA sequences are different in certain places, and this actually changed the characteristic of the virus to make it more or less virulent or to affect our health in different ways. So viruses are just one species, but bacteria also evolve very quickly. Next slide. This is number 5. Birds evolved wings so that they can fly. Well, this again comes to the problem of teleology, the wording of the sentence. It sounds like birds purposely wanted, say, some kind of an animal without a wing, wanted to have wings, so somehow got wings. Well, this actually is not the way it happened. It happened more like somehow the animals had some mutation which resulted in feathers or wings. And then they found out that, oh, we can use these wings to fly. So it wasn't, it even sounds ridiculous to think that an animal can say, I want wings, therefore I will get wings. Even humans haven't managed to evolve wings. They've only managed to build airplanes in order to fly. Next. Mutations occur in order for organisms to adapt to their environment. Okay, this is another example of the problem of teleology, that mutations don't occur on purpose. Mutations just occur because of some random event. The DNA changes in some random way. Very often the mutations don't do anything, but sometimes they change the traits of the organism. For example, what happens in bacteria? Well, sometimes, in fact, even today, doctors will overprescribe antibiotics. So sometimes we get antibiotics even if we just have a viral cold or something for which the antibiotic won't help. But what happens when we take too much antibiotic, or if we take antibiotic for just a few days instead of the full 10 days that the doctor has said, is that the antibiotic will only kill some of the bacteria. The bacteria that survive will be resistant. In any population of bacteria, again, there will be variation. So there will be a few bacteria that are resistant to the medicine. And these bacteria just have random mutations. The mutations may have happened long ago, or they may be happening at that time itself. But they're not happening because they're given the medicine. They're just randomly happening. And they just randomly happens that some of those mutants will be able to survive the medicine, the drug that's given. So what happens is then those bacteria are the ones that live, and they become the most abundant type of bacteria. And then later on, if we really have some kind of an illness which requires an antibacterial medicine, that medicine will no longer work because all the bacteria are resistant to all the medicines that we have. So this is called antibiotic resistance, which is a real problem these days. So anyway, the mutations don't occur in order for the organisms to adapt. They occur randomly, and they result in this difference. Next. Okay, so we've seen all of these problems, what I think are problems, and we could categorize them as to why is it that we are so confused about these things. In many of the cases, it's a problem of teleology. In some cases, it's because we have some misguided emphasis on competition rather than cooperation. In some cases, like for number 2, Darwin discovered evolution, it's just because of some mythology or because we have just put too much importance on one famous person, who of course is a white male European. So it's an example of some kind of racism or Eurocentrism that we put too much emphasis on Darwin. And we're also just misunderstanding the nature of science, that we put so much importance on one individual. Also, this problem of just misunderstanding the definition of evolution is why we say that humans evolved from apes. We misunderstand what an ape is. And we somehow think that people are so different from apes that we must be better than apes, even though they can see our imperfect behavior, killing each other, making wars, and so on. In other cases, we're just disregarding evidence. That's another example of how we're not really understanding the nature of science, that we have to look carefully at evidence in order to know if something is true or false. So maybe that's why some of you said that this number 4 is true rather than false. You just haven't looked at the evidence of things that have evolved within the last 200 years. Sometimes we're just misunderstanding biology also, when we're thinking like about this problem of mutations. Next. So here I've just listed out, I thought maybe you're wondering, so why is this an important topic anyway? Why should we waste our time thinking about evolution and worrying about the cause of evolution? It's just a boring topic. What do you think? Is there any reason? Does it help you in your day-to-day life? I've listed out some reasons here. You could list up your own reasons. But one of the things that I think is important is that we learn that some events are not teleological and that humans are not the center of the universe. That we don't always get what we want, that evolution happens and the environment keeps changing even though it doesn't change in the way that we want it to change. Number 3, we learn about the dialectical nature of science. By this I just mean that biology is a matter of dialectics between two things that seem to be opposite but are actually inherent to biology. For example, chance and necessity. Mutations happen randomly, but they also happen because there's a necessary reason. Maybe radiation causes the mutation. Or there's the dialectic between variation and similarity. Organisms are both variable and similar. And there's also the dialectic between mistakes and perfection. If there were so many mistakes occurring during DNA replication, that if there were too many mistakes occurring, then organisms couldn't reproduce. But if there were not enough mistakes occurring, then organisms would all be identical and there would be no evolution. In fact, there would be no life at all. 5, it enables us to study biology, and actually evolution is quite central to any area of biology. If you're studying biology at a higher level or even at a lower level, evolution is always central to our study. And number 6, it actually helps us figure out how to improve our world and prevent environmental crises. We can figure out, for example, through artificial selection, how to get the kind of food crops that we need. Next. So I think I'm going to stop here, just with this reminder that as educators, we want to increase scientific timbre, and we teach and learn about evolution and natural selection, not just in order to understand and examine and understand life, but to make our world a better place.